evening, everyone, and welcome to the Fight for Student Voices, a webinar hosted by the Student Press Law Center and the Society of Professional Journalists. I'm Claire Regan, past National President of SPJ. This webinar marks the launch of a new partnership between SPLC and SPJ, a partnership forged by a shared mission of defending and protecting press freedom in every state, especially for student journalists. Tonight, we'll hear firsthand from the newspaper staff at a Virginia high school where press rights were challenged by school administrators. SPLC staff members will offer updates about New Voices, a grassroots movement of activists who seek to protect student press freedom with state laws. I'll hand it over now to Beatrice Foreman, SPJ at-large director, who will moderate the discussion and offer further introductions. B.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beatrice, and I'm a breaking news reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and like Claire said, an at-large director at SPJ. I'm also a former student news editor who went toe-to-toe with my college's administrators, which is why I'm so heartened to leading this conversation. When we think of freedom of the press violations, it's very easy to only think about what's going on nationally. President Donald Trump's attempts to ban the Associated Press from briefings and doctor press corps that's favorable to him are travesties in their own right. But they also create a climate that trickles down to the hyper-local level, where school board officials are, say, trying to censor student journalists from investigating their own school communities. That's what's happening at the Diogany, the award-winning student newspaper at Alexandria City High School in Northern Virginia. The Diogany, like many student newspapers, fill a crucial gap in local education reporting, especially over the past year when its reporters began digging into issues with the school's overhaul of its high school campuses and teachers' contracts. The Diogany spurs change. Teachers received cost of living adjustments after the paper reported on how the district could struggle to keep teachers without them. And after the paper reported on a car accident between a school bus and a car full of students that happened during school hours, the high school enacted better safety measures. The Diogany's work is often republished by local papers alongside that of professionals. But that's not enough for the Alexandria City School Board, who now wants the high school principal to have the final say over what the Diogany publishes and wants to strip students of their journalistic privileges if they publish work professionally. That's crazy. That's textbook censorship. And it's also authoritarianism at the most hyper-local level, which is why I'm so glad these students are not backing down about the quality of their work. Today, we're going to hear from outgoing co-editor-in-chief of the Diogany, James Libresco, and incoming co-editor-in-chief, Rozalia Finkelstein, and about, the fight to maintain their editorial independence. After, SPLC staff attorney Jonathan Gaston-Falk and advocacy associate Grayson Marlowe will make presentations on how SPLC is helping student journalists codify protections for themselves in the state laws and what you can do to make that happen. Finally, a brief housekeeping note. There's going to be about a 10-minute or so audience Q&A after. I encourage you to drop your questions as you think of them in the chat throughout the conversation, because we're going to be covering so much ground, and then we'll get to as many of them as we can. And if we don't get to your questions, we will drop some emails and contact info and way to get involved at the end if you contact. So let's keep it going. So my first question for our two student journalists is, how did you decide that you wanted your school paper to get more into investigative reporting? And what has the projects you worked on taught you about doing good journalism? I'll start with James.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to SPJ and the SPLC for putting this on. It's truly an honor to be here among all of you. And yeah, so to dive into your question, most of this started when our school district initiated a project they called the High School Project. So Alexandria, Virginia is right next to DC. We're the school. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Remember the Titans, but that is our school. And there's a big attachment in Alexandria to keep one high school, just like how it was in Remember the Titans, and not expand and add more high schools. But at the same time, there's been way more students, a huge population boom. And that has caused, big overcrowding. So we started opening multiple campuses of the same high school. And then we started having things like busing students back and forth between campuses during the school day. We had an administrative restructuring, the removal of many beloved administrators from the high school to kind of fit the mold of this project. And all we did really was just report on what was going on. A lot of these changes our community was not aware of. Um, and we kind of just shined a light on some of the challenges and the good parts of the high school project too. And we shared these with the community. A big one was busing. So you mentioned a car accident. That definitely was one part of the story, but I would say the bigger thing is you had hundreds of students walking all a half mile, a little more than a half mile on some of the busiest roads in our city in the middle of the school day. And it was a big problem for our community. People, they were walking into oncoming traffic, things like that. And there really wasn't anything, there wasn't a lot publicly that we could see that was being done. And then after we reported on it, our city council got involved and there was a lot of pressure. Local news kind of helped as well after we reported on it. And our school district eventually started enacting changes that improved the situation. And that's just one example. There are many others, but that's the kind of reporting that we did to shine a light on some, you could say, controversial issues. And that's really what kicked off this whole thing. Oh, I think you're muted, Beatrice.
Sorry. Rozalia, what has helping work on these stories kind of taught you about journalism ethics or just like doing good journalism?
Yeah, it's taught me a lot this year. Like James said, the past few years, Theogony has definitely gotten a lot more into reporting on sort of the local maybe issues or concerns in our school community with things like Inside the High School project and also just a lot about local politics and local issues. Like we did, for example, something I was part of was live election coverage, where we did live updates and we're the only news source in our area that was able to predict local elections races. It was really fun for me as a young journalist to learn about these ethics, and learn how to do good investigative and reporting in our community, because it really taught me just the effect we can have on our community. Like these are stories that are not just being, I guess, put out into a void where no one sees them. They're having tangible change that we are able to see around us in real time. And that has been really eye-opening for me. Like James said, our transport article, which was maybe our first really big article this year, that did not just go out and no one cared. That resulted in transport being improved and the city council getting involved, and overall Alexandria City High School operating smoother than it had before. So as a young journalist, I guess this experience of being able to be on a newspaper that does these things and helps make change has taught me the importance of journalism, especially in a modern world, not just on a national scale, but on a local scale, and how it's the small things that when people have a voice and are allowed to use it, things can get done.
I am
And
just so impressed to hear that you guys are doing live coverage, by the way. That is one of the hardest things I do at the Inquirer on a regular basis. So to see you guys are the only, news source in your area that's capable of doing that is like super amazing. And James, you wanted to add on for a second?
oh yeah, well I would say yeah, live coverage has really been super fun to kind of launch that. We started this year. Um, but I mean, like Rosalia said, um, we reported on the plane crash in the Potomac River before the Washington Post. That was right next to it was about a mile away from my house actually. And we've actually done any student journalist that's watching this, like maybe you haven't had some of these kind of, especially the plane crash, like higher profile type things, but the work that you do can have a big impact in your community. You just have to believe it and believe, maybe you're not having like tons of readers on your website each day. That's okay. Keep pushing forward. If you keep doing the work and you do it right, people will care. And yeah, like you can genuinely have a huge impact.
Oh, Okay, so it's clear you guys are pretty heavy hitters and good at what you do. I've read your work. I'm very impressed by it. So then, can you kind of walk us through how, how the school district started to attempt to censor you guys and the expanse of the policy they proposed? James, I guess you want to start because I know a lot of your bylines or what they take issue with.
Well, yeah, I think it's a very nuanced situation. Um, so to being fully transparent, for years, technically our principal was in policy the editor of the newspaper. But by practice, that had never happened. And as we know, as the case law shows, practice is really what matters, as our friends at SPLC taught us. But yeah, so after we kind of started these more hard-hitting articles, we had a couple of conversations. We heard that we were kind of setting off a wave, and our district PR team wasn't too happy about it. So we invited them to have a couple meetings, to go over it and kind of try to sort things out, um, and, get on good terms. And what actually had happened is they tried to initiate something without school board approval where we would have to have conduct all of our interviews with the school PR team present, or the school district PR team, which logistically is just not possible. And also for us, we took that as kind of something that would intimidate the people who were interviewing, especially teachers. If your boss's boss is watching you, you're not going to speak your mind truly. Um, and they also requested permanent access to a list of all of our ongoing articles, and things like that were kind of like micro censorship. Maybe not micro, I don't know. They're trying, obviously, some little suppression. And we tried to sort it out. We couldn't get to an agreement. We said, can you make us do this? And they basically said, under the current school board policy, no. But the policy is going to be up for review very soon. And then over the summer, that was last June and last May. Over the summer, then we started crafting a policy that we knew would support student publications, and our city as a whole. And we took a lot of stuff from the SPLC website. Later on, we started working with the other student publications at our school to get things that all of us would want. And we crafted this policy together called Voices Unbound, and then the SPLC really went in and helped fix up a couple things as well. And then yeah, I mean that then we this new policy was presented. So the school district released their draft of what they wanted to see, and it was about the exact opposite of Voices Unbound. It took it just made everything stricter. It codified a very specific process about how our controversial or high interest articles would get reviewed and edited by our principal. But I mean, yeah, you know how that goes. And
Yeah.
yeah, and also, like you said, the original draft said we would lose journalistic privileges if we if we interviewed teachers for a local publication without going through the school PR team. We could be fired from the school newspaper, things like that were clearly just meant to suppress us. And that it also, banned us from taking pictures of people without having everyone in the frame sign a form saying that, they approved to be in our pictures, just things like that. I mean, some of these things are starting to get sorted out, others not so much. But
Can I ask where this stands like now, like at most recently, what's the what's like kind of like the most recent update?
So yeah, our school board policy committee, they call it the governance committee, is still editing this draft after, I mean, it was set to be voted on already, but due to the huge community backlash, it has gone through several rounds more of editing. We actually, unfortunately, can't see the current draft. There hasn't been an update of the draft since the very beginning of May. on our website, so it's not very transparent, the process of what's going on. But from what I hear, there is going to be a pretty good change, where the principal can only edit articles going back to the Tinker standard that are disruptive, which is good. But we also, we want to see ourselves established as a public forum. We want tons of protections for our staff advisor, for others. So our fight has been pretty successful so far, but there's still more work to do.
And if you
So
don't
I
mind,
know, James. Yeah, I was going to ask how you feel about it since you're the one inheriting the paper.
I'd just like to add some context to some of the things James said, especially with our first initial meetings with the PR team at the end of last year. That happened right after James's first article and our first Inside the High School project article, which was a breakdown of the 16 administrators who are having to reapply for their job. And in that article, a lot of administrators were using aliases and were expressing discomfort with the school in a way that they maybe would not feel comfortable with a PR person right behind them. So this was not something that came about randomly, and it was not something that came about because we had anything libelous or slanderous or disruptive in our newspaper. It came out purposely after we wrote an article that had discussed that let teachers share in their voice in a way that was maybe not the best spin for the PR team. Just wanted to add that.
Makes sense. So how do you feel about where the where the policy stands and all of this limbo since you're the new editor and you're one of the new editors in chief?
Mm-hmm. It's mixed feelings, because it was a little devastating to be at first when we saw that all of the work over the summer and all of this work to make a new what's it called going forward was just basically ignored in the new policy. But the fact that our community advocacy and outreach has touched so many people and has gotten such a large support from the community makes me more hopeful going forward, because I think that I love our staff, and I think that next year, because it's basically being pushed next year, that if we keep doing what we're doing, we have a pretty good shot.
And I'll add, Rozalia
Um,
said, oh, sorry. Who?
oh, go.
Okay, I was just going to say, Rozalia said we love our staff, and we do, but more than that, we love our school and we love our school district.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not people who are coming out here, trying to disparage our school for some reason. It just doesn't, frankly, it doesn't make any sense why we would want to do that to our own school. But we want to make it a better place, not just for us, but for people in the future. And one way to do that is just by telling the truth and sharing what's happening, actions that may have been hidden. And I mean, Rozalia, I have the highest confidence in Rozalia and the rest of our incoming editors. This fight is far from over. And they're going to do a great job keeping up, not just here, but I mean, around the country as well. We've gotten letters from people all over, and new voices is more important now than ever. So yeah.
I mean, I've been so in all of you guys. I first read about this situation in the Washington Post. So I wanted to ask, have other student journalists in Virginia or elsewhere reached out to you guys and asked for help or talked about going through something similar?
Yeah, I would say when our editorial was first published, we've gotten, James can attest to this, so many emails from practically about everyone of every shape and color and background, whatever. But specifically, we did get emails from student journalists, especially local student journalists, who felt heard from our story and felt like they related to it very much. Like, for example, just off the top of my head, the West Potomac Wire was one of the first people to reach out to us. That's a school very close to us. And they said, yes, we completely agree with what you're saying. And they actually published their own article, I think, just a few days later, completely supporting us and, saying that they felt like they faced the same issues in their school district. So I feel like us speaking up about our censorship has maybe inspired or giving other student journalists, at least from what I've seen, the confidence to do the same.
And it's not just been schools near us. I mean, we've had 2 schools in our immediate area, write about it. We've had another one in DC, starting to ask questions about, their own status. Even though DC is a New Voices state. So I mean, we've gotten things from Colorado, Florida, really all over, like Rozalia said. And I also want to say we have tried to be incredibly supportive to these people, because the entire reason we were able to do any of this, well, I mean, we just were really inspired by a presentation at the National High School Journalism Convention in Philadelphia last fall. Students from University Preparatory Academy, I think it's called, the Aquila. It's in California. I think one of them might be on this call, but they really inspired us, and they showed us kind of that, we could do this. And that they really helped us understand that this is kind of an outrageous situation. And giving that reassurance, because I mean, by school board members, by people in the community, I mean, if you look at some of the comments on our Washington Post article as well, people will try to tell you that you're crazy for wanting basic First Amendment rights. And you're not crazy. So I mean, that's what we're trying to do, to trying to tell all these other student journalists, because what you do matters. And yeah, you just have to, it's right, so fight for it.
Thinking back to myself in high school and as anxious I was about college and just, being a young journalist, I feel like a big inclination is to self-censor because you don't want trouble. So I guess what is like your biggest piece of advice to student journalists who are concerned about censorship or might be in similar situations to those?
I would say find your allies. Like James said, it does kind of feel like you're going crazy at times because you're a high school student, you're 16, 17, and you have all these grown adults all around you saying, no, you're wrong, this is dumb, sit down, shut up. And that can be hard at times. And you do feel like, oh, maybe I'm the one blowing this out of proportion, or maybe, we did something wrong, or, this is our fault or whatever. But the truth is, especially in the modern age with the internet, there are so many people willing to help you if you look at the right places, like just with like the SPLC and things. Like I remember I was at the Boston conference a few years ago when I first heard about the SPLC, and that was eye-opening. That was like, kind of sounds a little familiar. Might want to look into that more. And just especially like with other people in your area, like at least in our experience, so many older journalists, professional journalists have been so kind and supportive to us, and more than willing to help us out, and tell you that, again, like James said, you're not crazy and that you have support.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
What advice do you have for student journalists who might be in similar situations or fear they want to make or feel like they might need to self-censor because they don't want trouble?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real issue. In terms of self-censorship, I've done it. I'm sure Rosalia may have done it. It's a big problem. And I regret every instance that I've self-censored. Ultimately, you're gonna regret it. Just go for it. And if they block you from doing it, um, in many cases, it's illegal. Um, and you have the resources here at the SPLC. Even if it's something that's like, even if it's about, a football game or something like that. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. If something's being blocked, it's a problem. And you have the resources on your side to kind of to get that published. And so really just don't self-censor. It's tempting. It makes the situation a lot more comfortable on the outside, but it's bad for everyone at the end of the day. And advice, I would say, people have told us that, like, wow, like, you guys, I can't believe you did this so quickly and put this all together. No, we've been working on this for about a year at this point, and we just kind of went public with everything last month. So it's been a huge work in progress. The big thing is, like Rozalia said, to get support, to make sure you have support before going public, which you will, but you just need to put yourself out there and talk to people. We were lucky enough that our community already kind of knew who we were and had seen some of the reporting we've done, so they were kind of automatically on our side. But I would really suggest talking to local journalists. They have huge networks. Journalists have probably a bigger network than anyone because they talk to so many people. Talk to local journalists, even talking to national journalists. Like Peter Baker of the New York Times replies to my emails now, which is crazy to me. But like people really care to support you. And they will if you ask for it, especially elected officials as well. Like your school board might not, obviously, but the city council representatives and the state legislature, they will very likely support you. Um, so doing a lot of the brunt work behind the scenes, making it easy for people to share your story. We have a document, it's just a Google Doc, but it's linked to our petition, an email template, a pre-addressed email template, has a phone number for people, our school phone number. It has links to submit op-eds or letters to the editor in all the papers around us. Things like that. Make it easy for people to support you. And we can maybe even put that in a chat. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you make it easy, they definitely will.
And one of the big parts that I saw in like the comment section for the Washington Post article is like, oh, like they're not professional journalists, like they don't deserve the same protections, they're still learning. But the reality is most professional journalists started off as student journalists in one place or another, and we would not get to where we are today if our school board decided to come in and clamp us down right as we were getting started, right? So with that in mind, we have a lot of professional journalists on this call, I hope. And what can we do to help you guys?
Well, I just put in the chat our action steps document. I think that would be helpful if you could just go through there, send an email. You might not want to use our exact template, change up the words a little bit. But yeah, I mean, but in general, I would say just sharing our story for one, but no matter where you live, if you live especially in a state that's not a New Voices state, there's a high likelihood that somewhere in your area this is happening. The exact same thing is happening to another school, and they don't yet know the resources around them that they have to support them. So I would say I would challenge every single professional journalist in here tonight after this call or tomorrow to find your local high school email address and send them an email and ask, what's going on. Maybe do it to two or three. Because just one person, like having one person they can rely on can really be a lifeline and it can open them up. So please do that. And you might make a big impact for these students.
Great. Well, we love a challenge. Now we're going to move on to the next part of our program where Jonathan Gaskins-Falk, a staff attorney with the Student Press Law Center, is going to talk to us a bit about how these New Voices laws work and why we're focusing on the state level and not the national level. So I'm going to kick it over to Jonathan now.
Sure. Thank you so much, V. Hey, everyone. Jonathan Gaskins-Falk here. I am just so appreciative to SPJ to have us at SPLC together with this unified purpose and to acknowledge these students for doing such wonderful work. I think that we've already alluded to the fact that these students are inhabiting a niche, a local news niche where there might be a desert or things just aren't getting covered, and who better to cover the local community than student journalists who are in this space. And unfortunately, at some schools, we have the mistaken impression from our districts that somehow the student journalists are some sort of PR arm of the district. And that's just not the case, especially if we have a history of independent journalism, as James and Rozalia have been talking about this whole time. But just to take a 30,000-foot view back and put us in a context here, it is significant that we are in the public space. It's a public school. That's how the First Amendment gets involved. But these students want to to hold their folks in authority accountable. And that's one of the basic tenets of the First Amendment, of that freedom of speech and of the press. And that's what these students are trying to exercise with government officials. Anyone in the school district, from the school board on down, school board members are elected officials on down, and the school board, gives authority control to, like the principal that James was talking about before. But it's all within limits. It's all that, administrators don't get full control and say off of what the students get to publish. And I'll go into a little bit about that through a presentation that I have, just so that you all see some of the headlines that these students have been publishing. I mean, these are very important pieces of news that are holding their folks in authority accountable. It's not making the school district sometimes look that great. James, I think, articulated very well that it's coming from a place, of improvement, wanting to improve the district, that he loves his school district, but sometimes making that change is uncomfortable and highlighting things that those officials aren't doing right or could do better. And so in this scheme, we have back from the Supreme Court case from the 60s, Vietnam War era, really one of our major moments of controversial topics. School districts, public school districts, didn't want students commenting on the Vietnam War. It was anti-American to oppose it. And so out of the Tinker Court for the Supreme Court, we have helpful guardrails that even in expression in school, students don't get to say whatever the heck they want, carte blanche. We have some guardrails that are useful. They aren't able to engage in two areas of speech. And one is that speech that invades the rights of others or interferes with the rights of others. And then second, because we're in school, we're there to learn. We're there to learn in a safe environment. We're not allowed to, as students, engage in speech that would interfere with that learning process. But let me get into what that looks like. So speech that interferes with the rights of others. So that's always unprotected areas of speech. So if you were to go on social media and engage in these, or even in your public park, you would not be able to stand behind the First Amendment and go ahead and get away with this sort of speech. These can be curtailed in the same way that if the student newsroom, were to release speech that engaged in these, at that point, the administrators would be able to come in and lawfully censor these students. But as we've seen here, and as Rozalia has indicated as well, that's not what we're engaging in here. We're not engaging in libel, which is the publication of a false statement of fact that seriously harms someone's reputation. These students didn't have invasion of privacy in their news stories. We didn't have some sort of hidden camera in the locker room covering the football team. We're not engaging in copyright infringement, taking things that don't belong to us and publishing someone else's intellectual property without their permission. Advocacy of illegal drug use or inciting our student body to engage in imminent lawless action. These are all things that interfere with someone else's right just to be. Obscenity, that's a little different. It doesn't mean that the students can't publish the F-bomb. It means that they can't paint some sort of sexually explicit portrait with their words. No making threats against anyone in the school district or a building, anything like that. All of these are unprotected areas of speech that even in the 60s, the Tinker Court had foreseen that we can't engage in. And then second of all, in school, again, we can't disrupt that students, the educational process, that learning process. So what this means is, let's say that the students here wanted to cover a protest or a walkout. They could cover it just fine. They can't compel or they can't advocate for folks to walk out of their school building during class because it's a physical disruption of the educational process, the reason why we're in class, that the Tinker Court was able to articulate. And any sort of administrator who wants to censor because of this second area, there has to be some sort of reasonable forecast of that disruption, not just some mere hunch to say, oh yeah, I think this isn't gonna go well among our student population. No, it has to be, in my 30 years of experience as a principal, this is gonna cause a riot. That's something that we're not allowed to engage in. And so we don't have that carte blanche when we're talking about the Tinker Standard. And the Tinker Standard is what these students wanted to return to, because unfortunately, where Virginia is right now is under this other case, Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeier. I'm proud to say that Kathy Kuhlmeier is on this call and listening. Hello, Kathy, we love you. This was an 80s case, a little bit later, where the Supreme Court made a distinction between bringing speech in, it's your own speech, maybe from home, like in the Tinker case, the black armbands to oppose the Vietnam War. The Supreme Court in the 80s made a shift where if it is possible to associate a publication with the school district, the Supreme Court wanted to give the district some sort of wherewithal to modify that speech or censor that speech because it bore the school's imprimatur. That's just fancy words for saying, if a Joe off the street were to raise up the newspaper like, oh, the district espouses these viewpoints. And that's a sort of confusion that James and his team have been wrestling with because the PR department at his district has said, oh, well, we're able to do this. But even then, even under Hazelwood, first off, there needs to be some sort of educational reason, a pedagogical purpose, the Supreme Court articulated, to censor lawfully, even if it's a student publication bearing that school's imprimatur. But fortunately, we have certain cases and certain strategies that we can use. So one of the cases that we directed James to was that pattern and practice that he was alluding to before. If a newsroom has been dealing with some maybe controversial topics over the course of however many long years, and then all of a sudden an article is published, or there's a rumor about an article getting published, and all of a sudden an administrator steps in. And because of that content, wants to strip that right away from the students or censor that particular article. That one particular case is a federal district court case out of Michigan called Dean versus Utica. And that judge told us that Hazelwood here does not have supreme say-so, especially in situations where there is that pattern and practice of content, of students being able to dictate their own content. But then we also have new voices on a state-by-state basis. I'll let Grayson, our advocacy associate, talk about that part. But we also have a district-by-district fight that students who are enterprising, like these Alexandria City students, if they are willing to approach our hotline, approach other allies in the field about this stuff, they're able to approach their boards of education, the deciders of the school district, to pave the way for future freedoms of expression that more resemble the Tinker standard than they resemble the Hazelwood standard. And unfortunately, another thing that this particular school district wanted to return to or add to the restriction of these students, not just the Hazelwood standard, but this idea of punishing these students for their off-campus speech, for their independent journalism. They might have an internship with a news outlet off campus, and now all of a sudden, this school board wants to be able to punish these students for not getting permission or running things by the PR department. We have another Supreme Court case about that. I'm filled with them, called BL versus Mahanoy, where a cheerleader was censored and punished for off-campus speech, and the Supreme Court said no. There's a limit to which the school district is able to punish that student when it comes to that off-campus speech that's not engaged in the school day, not on school devices. But that's its own sort of kettle of fish that I won't get into here. The point being that this school district, in its original incarnation of that proposed policy, massively overstepped. That is pretty much where I'd like to end things, at least for my spiel for the moment, but I'd like to pass things off again to our advocacy associate, Grayson. Grayson, if you'd like to share your screen now going forward.
Before we get into that, just a couple of brief reminders. Questions are starting to trickle in from the chat. Please keep asking your questions as you think of them in the Q&A option on Zoom, and we'll get to them. And then the other thing I wanted to note was that we have a copy of the print version of the Diagony available for perusing in case you want to ask any questions about content. Same with James's action step document. That's available. You can also ask questions about that. Now let's kick it over to Grayson.
Thanks. I am going to talk to you a little bit about new voices and our advocacy work around it. As John shared a little bit about the law and where we're now here, for the past 37 years, SPLC and advocates across the country have been working on state legislation to provide basic rights for student journalists. These include protections that say that students determine the content of their media, allowing them to explore the important stories that we know that they can report on. It provides protections from retaliation for advisors in the case that they refuse to infringe upon their rights, and keeps them encouraging students to write these stories. and generally allows everyone to be on the same page about what the rights of student journalists are. But New Voices in itself has only been around for about 10 years. Is my presentation moving forward?
Not so far, Grayson.
Please. There we go. So this is what the state of New Voices across the country looked like prior to 2015, when North Dakota actually passed their New Voices law. And prior to that, we didn't have the term New Voices. Of course, there was California's law being our oldest, that was passed in 1977, 11 years prior to the Hazelwood decision, and the other 5 passed in the 27 years between that decision and the 2015 law. And this is luckily what we're looking like today. Certainly better, but still some work to do. There are currently 18 states that have New Voices protections for at least high school student journalists, and we are looking to add more and more every year. Some additional state highlights I'd like to point out is Arizona, which in 2017 actually passed in both the House and Senate, but was vetoed by the then governor, unfortunately. And of course, in Virginia, where we did have a combined high school and college protection bill in 2020, unfortunately, the high school protections were scrapped from that bill, and the bill passed with only college protections. And it's important to highlight this because had this law passed with the high school protections, our students here today would not have to be fighting for the rights. They would already be afforded them. So how can we do it? How can we get these bills passed? Unfortunately, we do say that there is a little bit of magic in trying to get bills passed, but there are a couple things that we always could use in getting these things across the line. The first and foremost, the most important aspect of New Voices is student voices. So if you are a student journalist, there are many ways that you can get involved, but know that no bill will pass without your voices, without you contacting your legislators and asking them for this legislation to become law. But there's many other ways you can get involved, whether it be testifying in front of people, advocating for a school board policy like our students here today, or some students engage in behind the scenes work, helping organize and strategize ways that we can get laws passed. And another thing I like to highlight here is that on the top right over here, these are those students that had that bill in 2020 in Virginia. Unfortunately, we haven't been back since, but we are always looking for ways to get back into the legislature and pass the high school protections that Virginia student journalists deserve. This is our toolkit for the work that James and Rozalia have been talking about. We encourage you all to use it if you're interested in getting involved in this type of advocacy. Obviously, it can't always be easy and perfect, but there are a bunch of tips and tricks in here for you to know if you want to get involved in that type of advocacy. Every state is different, and every state needs something different. And all of the information, up-to-date information on New Voices in the various states can be found on our website if you're interested in knowing where your state is and what your state needs to get this passed. This is what we've been working on this year. We've had 8 bills introduced. Unfortunately, many of these bills have since died with the session ending in their state, but we are still working in states like Pennsylvania with an upcoming lobby day later this month, actually. And we are also hoping to have further introductions in a couple other states before the end of the year. Just know that student journalism protections can't happen unless students are telling their stories. So know that you should tell your story, and SPLC has your back. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to you for questions.
All right, we have a couple of questions and comments. Feel free to ask more. But first, I wanted to start off with a little bit of praise. Kathy Kulmir just said she wanted to say that she's so proud of the fight that these students are continuing to battle, and would encourage them to keep up the good work and stand up for what they believe in. And with that, our first question is from August Kane, who says that they've been battling their censorship in Pennsylvania. It has been an upward battle trying to have a conversation with the admin responsible for the censorship. What helped you guys, James and Rozalia, to stay strong and keep from giving up during this long process?
I would say it's definitely difficult. It's grueling and it's tiring at times, but I mean, just remember, like, I hope that this webinar today has shown you that, like, people are on your side and people know that you are doing the right thing. in that, like we said earlier, find your advocates in your local community, find your allies, and also on a national level, like please email us. I can drop our email in the chat later if you would like to get in touch and we could talk. As other student journalists, I think it's important that we communicate and band together in a sort of way. But it's it's a lot of work, and a lot of it is just work. You just have to get things right. You have to write good articles. You have to tell good stories. You have to, do the right things. A lot of advocacy is boring until you get to the one really exciting part. But I hope that just know that you're doing great, whatever you're doing right now, and that you have friends.
And I'll add that, like, yeah, well, it says, like, it's been an upward battle, even trying to have a conversation with the admin responsible. That's really disappointing. We were lucky enough that our principal, who I actually really love our principal. And it's a little nuanced in our situation because he actually didn't do this, it was his bosses. But we were able to talk with him through it the whole time, and he was able to kind of tell us help us understand what was going on. So I would say just keep talking, asking why. Typically, if you're a student at a school, at least in our school, there's a policy that a principal has to meet with you if you request it. I believe at least that's definitely practice. So keep asking and like document your requests, and if they're continuing to ignore you, talk to their bosses. I mean, their information is on your school's website probably. Oftentimes the people at the top are much more receptive. Well, yeah, and at least in my experience, than your principal, because he's directly involved in some of the stuff you might be producing. And also I'll say, like, please reach out to us. I'll put my email in the chat right now for like more specifics. We can probably help you a lot with some of our documents. We have our planning documents, things like that give us a really solid start. That might be, I don't know, be a good strategy for you guys. But I mean, just knowing that you're in the right, um, that's really what kept me going, because I was told so many times that I was wrong. But I knew deep down, like, that it was the right thing to do. So if you keep that conviction, you'll probably come out on top, hopefully.
And if I could
Our
add,
next
just write the thing, just write what you're interested in and do the
Yeah.
research and draft it. And if you bring that to our hotline at SPLC, we can give it another set of eyes through pre-publication review, make sure it is legally sound. The censorship does not work, even if it doesn't printed in your district. Maybe you can get it printed elsewhere. Maybe you can put it online, some of that independent journalism. That's how you fight back against some of the censorship. Sorry, B.
Well, the next question is actually for you. It is from Jamie Killar, who says, "Can you speak about how these laws may differ in public schools versus private schools?"
Absolutely. And so two of our new voices laws actually have private school protections as well. If you, Jamie, happen to be in California or Rhode Island, those state legislatures have added basically the same protections that our public school friends have in private spaces. So you're able to take advantage of that. Pennsylvania, in their draft bill, Grayson said that, we're looking into Pennsylvania right now, this legislative session. That part of that proposed language was to include some private school protections. But in the absence of that, you're still able to make some First Amendment-like similar arguments. You're able to make a contract argument. If you happen to be in a private school, private space that may have guaranteed some sort of level of freedom of expression, in order to get you there in the first place. Courts have said that that is quasi-contract, that in exchange for your tuition, you should be getting some sort of level expectation of freedom of expression. And in the same way that these students are able to go to their administrators, as James was talking about, go to the guy's boss because your speech is too important for just your principal to be looking at, one set of eyes, kick it up the ladder of authority to get some more eyes on it. The same principle is true in the private school system. So you're able to go to, the headmaster, to your board of trustees, those same decision makers in the private space that you would in the public space as well. And because of a reliance on an alumni network in our private spaces, you're able to tap into those too. Get to your advisor, or if you are the advisor, start to get into some of the alums that are pretty into this space, whether they're journalists or otherwise, to start poking a little bit at administration to say, hey, this isn't okay. I'm an alum who gives a regular amount of money in donations. I want this changed. Because of the power of the purse, you're able to explore that as well. But again, please feel free to reach out to our hotline so we can brainstorm some of these things with you, because each private school is going to be different too. Thanks for the question.
All right. Our next question is more of a strategy question that I think is for Jonathan and Grayson. So Ali Chung, who works for a student newspaper in Florida, which is very important, Florida, keep that in mind, says, our newspaper staff wants to become more involved on the county level before the state legislative cycle begins. How do you think we should approach proposing an amendment? Should we stick to New Voice's goal of eliminating trial approval, or try to compromise given what we know about Florida politics?
Florida politics is definitely a difficult one, and one we've had many strategy meetings ourselves on how to get new voices in Florida, especially with the governor, who is unlikely to sign something like that. However, one of our strategies across all of our bills or all of our model policies is to include everything you want. And keep in mind that there might be a couple things that you have to let go of to get a good policy on the books, but make your perfect ideal policy and then whittle away from there if necessary. You never know what they might be willing to pass if you don't try it. So really try your most perfect vision of the protections that you want. As James shared, they have their policy and we have our own model policy on our website as well that you can take a look at. And really start with everything you could really imagine when your wildest dreams for protections, and then work away from there. James, I'd actually love to hear how you approached your school board with this sort of stuff, if maybe that's a little helpful to share.
Yeah, I will say I was in a pretty unique situation, as I knew multiple school board members on like a personal level. But I would say most of these people want to hear from students. Like, they don't get to hear a lot from students about what's going on in the schools. It's kind of rare when they do. So almost always they'll take a meeting with you, at the very least. And if you break it down for them, when you say like no prior approval or review, things like that, they sound really scary to them. But that's not actually a true representation of most likely what you're asking for. In our case, we were asking for it to go through our staff writer edit, and then an editor, and then a copy editor, and then editors in chief for like big articles, and then to our staff advisor, who would tell us if she thought there was something wrong with it. And it's not just like someone can just wake up, write whatever they want, and post it. That's not really how it is. And if you explain it that way, and help them see all the layers something goes through before it gets posted, that has been really helpful. And I'll also say, in our situation, a lot of our school board wasn't aware of what was happening until we went public about it. Even though, I mean, we requested to meet with all of them and stuff, but I'm sure they get a lot of emails. But if you like are persistent, like they'll meet with you. But like telling them what's going on they'll probably be a little bit alarmed. And yeah, I mean, it's really common sense. It's not that controversial to say the government should be able to stop speech from citizens. So just phrase it. The messaging is really important.
I'm going to get in my soapbox for 90 seconds since we have no more questions. To your point about compromising, I didn't know this until I was an adult, but you don't want your first pass at something to be a compromise, because they think that's your most radical idea, and it's going to get watered down further and further and further until it's something that you don't want at all, right? So how to compromise is to start with everything you want and then walk backwards until you get your minimum viable product. What is the baseline law you need to be able to do your job with correct journalism ethics and editorial independence? And on the same topic, because what we, in terms of trust and explaining, the work you do, a lot of people don't know how a newsroom works, and that reporters don't just type on their laptops and make up quotes and then post stuff online with no oversight. Everything in the newsroom goes through at least two other hands, if not 3 or 4, before it's published. And that's something you obviously need to explain while you're drafting these laws and meeting with school boards and state reps and city council members and whatnot. But it should also be something you do with your audience, especially as you're trying to curry public favor. A lot of professional journalists are now moving forward with being more transparent about how they do the work they do. They post FAQs and explainers of how we do our jobs. We post videos talking to the camera about how we do our news gathering process. And that is something you can start doing in high school, both as a learning experience to prepare yourself for the professional world if you want to be a journalist, but also to build trust, because hopefully your audience is not just your mom and your dad and your friends at school. It is your whole community, because the work you're doing is important and they deserve to know the process behind what they're reading. Obviously with lemons, don't just like post your reporting notes on the internet, but you can explain how the operation works. So with that, I'm off my soapbox. Thank you guys so much for being such a captive audience for the past hour. We're going to display a scannable QR code that takes you to all the resources you need to get involved with the Theogony, to get involved with New Voices, to learn more about SPLC, and to learn more about site professional journalists. If you are not an SPJ member and you liked this panel and you're interested in getting involved with more events like these, I would encourage checking us out and signing up for a membership. It's pretty low cost and it is so good for your career. You get to attend things like these, but you also get networking resources, invitations to conferences at the regional and national level, and just to be in community with other journalists who not only do the work but care about making our industry better and fairer. So yeah, I'm going to leave this up for about a minute or two more so you can scan it, and then we'll be good to go.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beatrice.